Hello friends, my name is Marines, and I've got a bunch of videos planned for you to wrap up my reading in 2015. Most of those videos will be up in 2016 when my reading year is actually complete, but I do have a series of more fun looks into some different categories of my reading so far. First up, young adult and middle grade heroines. All said and done, my reading will be half YA for the year, with the other half being made up of adult books and graphic novels in its own separate category. I will look more into that breakdown in a separate video, but for today it's enough to know that that equals about 30 YA books. Now, we do get into murky territory here with the classification of what is YA, what is middle grade, and who constitutes a hero. So I'm playing fast and loose with all of these terms, and basically I'm just going to be ranking and discussing all of the prominent female characters that I encountered in young adult literature this year, because I thought that would be a cool thing to do. I'm going to start from my least favorite characters and work my way up to my favorite character of the year. At number 17, and my least favorite female character in YA for 2015 is Farrah from A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. I'll admit that ordering these last few was a little bit challenging, but I decided to put Farrah in the last spot because she spends her life doing dumb things that people tell her not to do, and then she gets all put out when it ends badly or people get sick of her crap. Sorry, I didn't tell you that this book is a Beauty and the Beast retelling in a fairyland. This character suffers within her own story because she doesn't have very much to do besides get into trouble and fall for boys who are wearing masquerade masks. I could overlook that to a certain degree if she didn't also lack a sense of self-preservation. She's basically just a receptacle for the feelings and lust and emotions and attentions of the males in this story. None of them treat her particularly well, but we get the story from her point of view, which means that we have to suffer through her viewing the awful and douchey and rapey behavior of the guys and then thinking, well, maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe he was trying to help me. No thank you, Sarah J. Maas, and no thank you, Farrah. Number 16 is Lakyn from Slammed by Colleen Hoover. In this book, a young girl moves with her family and she's not very happy about the move, but then she meets like the across the street neighbor and she falls for him, but oh my gosh, she can't be with him because of reasons. Slammed is often categorized as new adult because Lakyn is 18 years old, but she's in high school and she acts like a 12-year-old. She basically spends the entire story slamming doors, stomping around, and whining that she can't quit school to be with the guy that she's been with for one date. Number 15 is Juliet from Shatter by Tahereh Mafi. Look, putting this here is making me feel a little bit icky because all we know about Juliet is that she's emotionally unstable and suffers some kind of detachment from reality. I don't want to judge her based solely on that, so the only other thing I can judge her on is her story, and her story is awful. This is a dystopian story, and we start with Juliet, who's in prison because her touch is lethal, so she can't touch anybody. She's been here by herself for a long time until one day a boy arrives. A lot of the emphasis of the first book is that she finds a boy that she can touch. And yeah, there's like bad dystopian stuff happening in the background, but touch, 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 touch. Plus, Mafi's writing is nonsensical, like not flowery or purple, it is straight up, this doesn't make any sense. So maybe I would like Juliet more if I ever knew what the heck she was talking about. Number 14 is Elena from Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. She probably isn't this bad of a character, but she's made worse by the fact that everyone tells you how amazing she is. I've only read the first book in the series, so I can't tell you about any character development going forward, but I can tell you about the character regression that happened in this first book. When we meet Selena at the beginning of the story, she's got the spunk and the survivor spirit and this F-em-all attitude, but then she gets to the palace of overlooked murders and pretty boys or whatever, and she just becomes this oblivious and superficial character. She is a textbook example of a Mary Sue, and I'll be honest and say that while I was reading, there was a moment I wished that someone had poisoned the mystery candy they left on her bed. Number 13 is Meyer from Red Queen by Victoria Aveyard. I wasn't a fan of Meyer, and one of the best things that happened on BookTube this year was when Mike from Slice of Mike called her a very whiny Pikachu. Never forget. I had issues with the way females were portrayed in this story overall. Pretty much everyone was a bitch except for Meyer, and then she comes in and she's constantly clutching on the males, and she makes these emotionally based decisions that make no sense, and yes, she's constantly whining. And the worst part of it is that she comes across this way despite the best efforts of the author, who tried to make her a tough girl, inadvertently at the head of a revolution, but sorry Meyer, you are no Katniss. Number 12 is Mim from Mosquito Land by David Arnold. This is a story of a girl named Mim who is very not happy with living with her father and new stepmother, and when she learns that her mother is sick, she decides to take a bus trip to go see her mother. I was pretty excited about this book because I love road trip stories, but but this story tried way too hard. Everything felt really forced and manufactured, including Mim. At the end of the day, she didn't feel like a fully functional character, but rather just kind of like a puppet to say the snarky things and to get across the very important lessons that the author was clearly trying to put into his story. When the story worked, it was usually because Mim had said something funny or witty, but that didn't happen nearly enough. Number 11 is Lucia from Falling Kingdoms by Morgan Rhodes. This story is about a kingdom that is divided into three, and basically all of the problems that those three countries have with each other. We follow 4 points of view, and one of them is Lucia, who is a princess in one of the kingdoms. Honestly, as I sat down and tried to think about Lucia, I didn't remember much about her, apart from the fact that she didn't want to kiss her brother. Actual plot point. I started to talk about it with some of my friends who I knew had read it, and I remembered that I was super frustrated with Lucia because she basically existed to be a well of power without a will. Like, someone told her, want to kill these bunches of people, and her reaction wasn't much more than, okay. I don't even know why, and this is a larger problem that I had with the first book of Falling Kingdoms, is that I didn't really understand the motivations of any of the characters, and Lucia certainly falls into that. Number 10 is Cody from I Was Here by Gayle Forman. In the story, Cody's best friend commits suicide, and Cody is tasked with going to her dorm room and collecting the rest of her stuff. Because of this journey, Cody learns that she didn't know as much about her best friend as she thought she did, but honestly, this book is primarily about Cody meeting a boy that her best friend used to date and that whole thing. Now, for Cody herself, the best that I can say about her is that she's entirely forgettable. She was super generic and a product of a lot of the tropes that Forman used within the story. Like, in a lot of ways, I feel like her reactions would be better explained because of the story and because of the tropes, rather than anything I felt came from her as a character, her personality, or her motivations. Number 9 is Sydney from Saint Anything by Sarah Dessen. In this story, Sydney's popular and charismatic older brother gets a jail sentence after a DUI, and that sends Sydney's life into a tailspin. In the story, Sydney is very overshadowed and overlooked in her family, and that really came across in her personality, which is a success of sorts if you consider what the author set out to do, but with me, it just kind of missed somewhere because she was so bland. Like, part of her thing was that she didn't have a fully formed personality because of the way that she had been brought up in this family, but it just, again, it read so flat within the pages. All of her responses were just so short. She didn't have any preferences, nothing that really marked her as anything other than meh. I feel like other people would be able to read that and relate to it, but it just missed for me and came across rather flat. Number 8 is Maggie from The Awesome by Eva Darrows. Maggie is basically a vampire slayer, but in order to become a full-blown vampire slayer, what she needs to do is lose her virginity because it's a thing. It's really interesting because Maggie's narrative voice is very strong. She's very in your face and brash and crass and a little bit gross. It reminds me kind of like potty humor, and how like some people are like, yep, potty humor is always funny, and then you have people like me that are like, Maggie was a little bit too much for me, but I can stand back and see that as a character she was very interesting because she's capable, but she makes mistakes. She lacks in the interpersonal department. She's very unapologetic, and I appreciated that the author gave her room to be that way within the story. Number 7 is Hazel from The Darkest Part of the Forest by Holly Black. In this story, there is a town that borders on a fairy town, and everyone accepts that fairies are a thing, and in the forest there is this glass coffin where a fairy prince has been under an enchanted sleep since like forever, until he isn't and he wakes up. Apart from that, we have Hazel, who made a deal with the fairies to pledge 7 years of her life because of certain circumstances you read about. I thought the story was okay to good, but I thought Hazel as a character was solidly good. Now, there wasn't anything very nuanced here. She's a badass character who's brave, if a little bit stubborn. If you want to know specifically which cliche this is, one of the first things that we're told about Hazel is that she kisses lots of boys at parties and she doesn't even care. Number 6 is Cleo from Falling Kingdoms by Morgan Rhodes. This is another one of the point of view characters, and I'll admit that for the first like 85% of the story, I did not like Cleo because she's kind of whiny and a brat and very sheltered, but that is done purposefully, and by the end of the story, I was rooting for Cleo above anyone else. She got entered into the School of Hard Knocks pretty quickly, and through unfortunate circumstances, had to realize that her life as a princess was pretty cushy. Also, as I mentioned with Lucia, the characters in this book suffered with some weird like motivations, and she's one of the only characters, Cleo Cleo is that wasn't all like gun-ho about killing lots of people. Plus, even though her decision making was questionable, I loved where it came from, and she really loves her sister, and sibling relationships are like a big thing for me, so I loved that she loved her sister and that she was a little bit naive about what she could achieve and what she could do, but she was very stubborn about it and she had her heart in the right place. I am going to continue with the Fallen Kingdom story, and one of the biggest reasons why is because I want to know what happens to Cleo. Number 5 is Coraline from Coraline by Neil Gaiman. This was a tough rank for me because when you come away from the story, at least for me, I came away more with a sense of the creepy other world and the creepy other parents and just kind of the plot and the setting, and Coraline seems to fade into that. However, if you think about it, she's very clever and she learns a very important lesson within her story, and what is that if not character development? Also, I just really love the precocious children that are at the head of stories like these, and you'll excuse me for my bias, but I especially love them when they're girls. Number 4 is Agnieszka from Uprooted by Naomi Novik. In this book, Agnieszka is selected by the wizard in the town to go and serve him. While Agnieszka does turn out to be a super powered person, I like that the book tries to avoid other tropes with her. She's tall and plain looking and very earthy, and she's always a mess and always dirty. The thing that stood out to me about her is her deep caring and determination to not only help her friends and family, but to help everybody who is in trouble and everybody who is affected by this like creepy woods. She's naive in a lot of respects, and that gets taken advantage of, but it's that quality in her that makes her the person best suited to deal with this, because where everyone else is too scared or too ingrained in what has always been, she sees things as how they can be, and she takes the steps, and she's bold enough to try and do the things that nobody else has ever done before. So people might complain about her and her sudden super abilities, but I think a lot of it also is her character. She could have these abilities, but the truth of the matter is that she's brave enough to try things and to do things that nobody else in the story is brave enough to do. Number 3 is Cress from Cress by Marissa Meyer. This is the 3rd book in the Lunar Chronicles, and it's a loose retelling of Rapunzel. The tower is a space station, but there's still lots of hair. Because Cress, the character, grows up in isolation, she's got this innocent charm about her, and I think it pairs really well with Cinder and Scarlet, who are a little bit more brave and brash. I feel like Cress is what I would be in an action-adventure story, and that is a little shy and awkward, but also like flailing over the hot guy. I read about her and I was like, yes, girl. Yes. I like though that Meyer balances that kind of like awkwardness and flailiness and made her also competent, because she's a computer genius and absolutely contributes to the effort in her own right. Number 2 is Carew from the Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy. So many times when authors try to write strong female characters, they do so by closing her off emotionally or cutting her off from other people, and those things are not true for Carew. She has an adoptive family that she loves a lot, and she has her friends that she cares deeply for. A bit of her story, and I'll say this vaguely so it's not a true spoiler, but a bit of her story is her putting herself in actual physical pain in order to help what she believes is the greater good. She goes through a lot in the series, including a sexual assault, and I thought it was very interesting to see the different ways that she handles it, from being at one point just emotionally exhausted and defeated, and other times very hardened and determined to do what she needs to do. So it was dynamic and three-dimensional, and I was rooting for her from the first scene where she pushes her skeevy ex-boyfriend through a glass door. And finally, my number 1 favorite female character in YA this year was September from the Fairyland series. I thought September was okay on my first read, but during reread and through finishing the rest of the series, I have just fallen in love with her, and she has become one of my favorite characters of all time. In a lot of ways, Valenti uses the magic of the setting in order to explore growing up, and we do watch September grow up, and it is beautiful and heartbreaking. September is brave and smart, and she's a small girl in a very big world that she doesn't know the way that it works, but she goes forth bravely and boldly, and she figures everything out, and she doesn't take a lick of shit from anyone. I also think it says a lot about this character that there are other characters that gravitate toward her, and they form this little family and this little band of misfits, and I just love that, and honestly, I love this character to pieces. Those are my rankings of the prominent female characters that I encountered in YA this year. Let's chat down in the comments, and you can tell me if I got it right or got it wrong, or what you think about these characters, or what I missed about their characterizations. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon.